It started on a night like any other, or so I thought. She was standing by the mirror, touching up her makeup with a kind of precision I hadn't seen in months. Her lips were painted a deep red, the kind of red that once felt like it was reserved only for our nights out together. Only for me. Tonight, though, there was something off, something behind her reflection that felt distant, closed. She looked beautiful, no, stunning, but somehow she looked like a stranger, as if all the changes had been waiting to show themselves on this one night. The dress she wore clung to her, deep red velvet tracing every curve, every line as she adjusted it in the mirror, smoothing the fabric with a certain finality. Her hair, usually thrown up in a messy bun, cascaded down her back in perfect waves, styled and intentional in a way I hadn't seen in so long. The scent of her perfume filled the room, something different and expensive, something unfamiliar and unrecognizable to me. I leaned against the doorway, my arms crossed, observing, feeling a quiet suspicion that I wasn't ready to admit out loud. "You're really going all out tonight," I said, my voice casual, although I couldn't keep the note of unease from creeping in. She glanced over, but only briefly. "It's just a night out with the girls," she replied, a hint of something strained in her tone. "Don't wait up. I'll probably crash at Stacy's. She insists every time we have a few drinks." Her lies slipped out so easily, and that's what made me pause. I'd almost admired her ease, her lack of hesitation. But I could feel the tension brewing, something I couldn't quite put my finger on, but it was there all the same. I nodded, forcing a smile to cover the questions I'd wanted to ask for weeks. "Be careful," I said. "See you tomorrow." She slung her purse over her shoulder, the strap brushing against her skin, catching on the dress she once wore for me. With one last glance in the mirror, she adjusted her necklace, flashed me a smile, and walked out, her heels clicking against the floor, echoing in the silence of the room. I watched her leave, the sound of her heels fading as she disappeared down the hallway. I stayed rooted there for a moment, breathing in the scent of her perfume that lingered in the air, feeling the weight of 1,000 questions I couldn't bring myself to ask. As soon as the door clicked shut, I moved quickly, crossing the living room to grab my phone. 3 months ago, at her insistence, we'd installed a GPS tracking app on both our cars for safety, she had said. But now, that very app was about to give me the answers I didn't know I was ready for. Opening the app, I watched as her cars down on the map moved steadily through the streets. I told myself I wouldn't follow her, that I'd just watch, see if she really was meeting up with her friends. But as I stared at that moving toward the city, something inside me snapped. I grabbed my jacket, the keys already in my hand, and followed, letting the quiet anger simmer as I started the car, keeping her in view on the map. The drive was short, but with every mile, the doubt gnawed at me more. The closer I got, the more uneasy I felt. She wasn't heading to the downtown area where her usual girls' night spots were. No, her route was taking her out toward the quieter outskirts of the city, where restaurants and bars faded into motels and diners open all night. My grip on the steering wheel tightened, the knot in my stomach twisting even more as the blinking stopped, finally settling on a location. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the anger churning inside. When I pulled into the parking lot, I recognized the building immediately, a small, forgettable hotel that looked like it hadn't been updated in years. I parked a few rows behind her car, far enough back to stay hidden, but with a clear line of sight to the entrance. My heart was pounding so loudly, I could hear it in my ears. But I waited, and I watched. Then there she was. She stepped out of her car, adjusted her dress, and walked toward the entrance with a confidence that twisted the knife even further. She wasn't rushing, wasn't looking around nervously, no. She walked with a certainty that hit me like a punch. This wasn't the walk of a woman sneaking away or filled with guilt. She looked like she was stepping into exactly what she wanted. The door closed behind her, and I sat in silence, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. I'd suspected for months, but this was something else. There was no denying it now, no hoping that maybe I'd gotten it wrong. She had lied to me, walked out the door with a smile, and gone straight into someone else's arms without a second thought. But I wasn't about to storm in there. Not like this. No, I needed to be sure. She needed to know that I saw through her lies, every single one of them. I pulled out my phone, opening the GPS tracker app again. Tonight, I told myself, was just the beginning. The next morning, I was already sitting at the kitchen table by the time she walked in. The sunlight streamed through the window, casting light across the room that felt out of place, too bright, too warm for the anger I felt. She slipped through the door, her dress wrinkled, makeup smudged slightly at the corners. She caught my gaze and smiled, casually tossing her purse on the counter, like it was any other morning. "Good morning," she said, her tone cheerful light. She went to the fridge, grabbing a bottle of water, and took a long sip. "Must have been some night," I replied, working hard to keep my tone even. "You're looking a little worn out." "Oh, you know how it is?" She laughed, glancing over her shoulder, her smile a little too bright, too rehearsed. "The girls and I stayed up late talking, lost track of time." She turned back to the fridge, but not before I saw the faintest hesitation in her smile. "I probably should have just come home." I nodded slowly, watching her closely. "Yeah, sounds like it was a good time. Must have been hard to keep up with Stacy and the others." She turned around, bottle in hand, and I could see something flicker in her expression, a hint of doubt, maybe. She opened her mouth to say something, but stopped, forcing another smile. "Oh, definitely. It was great catching up with everyone." I almost admired how effortless the lies seemed for her, like slipping on a mask she wore perfectly, fitting into the role of the doting wife with ease. But I could feel the anger building again, hot and heavy. I clenched my fist, trying to keep my voice steady. "So, what's on the agenda today?" I asked, as if it was any other Sunday, as if I hadn't spent the night before outside a dingy hotel watching her walk out of my life. She shrugged, sipping her water. "Just running some errands, maybe the gym. I'll probably get groceries on my way home." "Sounds productive," I replied, forcing a smile that I knew didn't reach my eyes. The rest of the day passed in tense silence. She moved around the house like she always did, her casual air unshaken, her phone always nearby. But I kept my eyes on her, catching every little detail. Every moment she seemed distracted, every text she sent. The following week was agony, holding everything back, pretending like nothing had changed. But I needed to gather more proof. I had a plan, one I'd been setting up in my head since that night, and every casual lie she fed me was just more fuel. I knew she wouldn't stop. Why would she? She thought she'd gotten away with it. And that was exactly what I needed. The next Saturday came, and with it, another excuse. She slipped on the same dress, styled her hair just as carefully, and dabbed on that unfamiliar perfume, flashing me a smile on her way out the door. But this time, I was ready. As soon as she left, I grabbed the bag I'd prepared and headed out the door, letting her down on the GPS lead me straight to her. She went to the same hotel, room 217. I waited until they were inside, then approached the hotel front desk, slipping a folded bill to the clerk in exchange for a spare key. No questions were asked. The clerk barely glanced at me as he handed it over. It took every ounce of control. I had to steady my hand as I opened the door to the room, ensuring that everything looked untouched. In the corners, I set up small, hidden cameras, positioning each one carefully. The final camera faced the bed, positioned so that there was no way she could deny what was happening. 2 days later, the footage was ready. I'd watched every second of it, feeling the shock and rage grow stronger with each passing moment. There she was, every lie captured, her deceit laid out like evidence in a trial. I had what I needed, but I wanted more than just the confrontation. I wanted her to feel it, every ounce of betrayal, every lie, and there was only one way to do that. Her birthday was a week away. Her birthday was the perfect opportunity to bring everything to light. She had been planning a big party for weeks, inviting friends and family, blissfully unaware that it would be anything but a celebration. I kept my cool, playing the part of the loving husband, even offering to take care of some of the details. She was thrilled, thinking I'd gone out of my way to make her day special. The morning of her party, I kissed her on the cheek, wishing her a happy birthday like nothing was wrong. She beamed, leaning into the kiss, entirely unaware of what lay ahead. "You're up to something, aren't you?" she teased, grinning. I gave her a sly smile, nodding. Maybe, I replied, letting her believe it was just a surprise gift. I could feel the tension building within me, each minute bringing us closer to the moment I'd been waiting for. By the time the party was underway, the house was filled with laughter and conversation, everyone mingling around, oblivious to the tension simmering below the surface. She was at the center of it all, greeting guests, smiling, playing the role she had perfected over the years. And for a moment, watching her like that, it was almost hard to believe what I knew, what I had seen. But then I remembered every moment of that footage, every kiss, every laugh that wasn't meant for me, and the anger returned. When I had everyone's attention, I stood, tapping a glass to get the room's focus. She looked over, a playful smile on her face, clearly expecting some grand speech about how much I loved her, about how lucky I was. I let her sit in that moment for a beat, then raised the remote I had hidden in my hand. "Thank you all for coming tonight," I began, keeping my voice steady. "It's a special night, a celebration for an incredible woman." I turned to her, smiling just enough to keep her at ease. And I thought I'd put together a little slideshow, a look back at some of her recent memories. The room dimmed, and the projector flickered to life. She looked delighted, her smile widening as the screen came to focus. But her expression changed almost instantly. There she was on the screen, walking into that hotel room with him, laughing, kissing him, and looking at him in a way I hadn't seen in years. Gasps echoed around the room, followed by stunned silence as people tried to process what they were watching. "Well, what is this?" she whispered, her voice barely audible, eyes wide with shock and horror. I kept my face calm, unflinching. "Just a little something I thought we should all see," I replied, my voice steady. "I thought it would give everyone a clear picture of what's been happening." She stammered, trying to find words, but nothing came. Her parents were frozen, disbelief and shock etched into their faces, and her friends exchanged wide-eyed glances, none of them prepared for this unveiling. The footage ended, and the room fell into a stunned silence. All eyes were on her, a mix of pity and shock, and she stood there, pale, trembling as the full weight of her betrayal hit her. "Happy birthday, darling," I said, my tone as icy as the silence surrounding us. Her face was a twisted mess of shame, guilt, and desperation. She tried to stammer something, maybe an excuse, maybe a plea, but I didn't give her the chance. I walked straight to the door, my head held high, and left her standing there, alone in a room full of people who now knew her for who she truly was. Outside, the cool night air hit me like a wave, washing away the tension I'd been holding on to for months. For the first time, I felt free from her lies, her betrayal, and the heavy weight of suspicion that had hung over me. A few minutes later, I heard her footsteps as she stumbled outside, tears streaking her face, a look of sheer desperation. "Please," she choked out, her voice cracking. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I never wanted to hurt you." I kept my distance, looking at her with a calm she clearly hadn't expected. "You didn't just hurt me. You destroyed everything we had, every single memory, every promise. It's all gone because of you." Her sobs grew louder, her body shaking as she tried to find something, anything, that could make it better. "Please, we can fix this. I'll end it with him. I'll never see him again," she pleaded, reaching out to me. But there was no room for forgiveness. "You made your choice," I said coldly. "You had every chance to tell me the truth, but you didn't. You chose to lie, to cheat, to throw everything away." Her face crumbled, and she collapsed to the ground, sobbing. I looked down, feeling nothing but the finality of it all. "Goodbye," I said quietly, turning and walking away without looking back. As I drove into the night, the city lights fading into the darkness, I felt a strange sense of peace, a quiet, steady calm that comes with knowing you've done what needed to be done. I was free, and she would have to live with the ruins of the life she'd destroyed. And I had no regrets. In the days that followed, I started piecing my life back together, sorting through the mess she'd left behind. I filed for divorce, moved my things out, and found a quiet, temporary apartment where I could finally breathe again. It wasn't easy, but every box I packed, Every memory I tucked away felt like a step forward, a step into a new life that was entirely my own. She tried calling, of course, texts, voicemails, even emails filled with apologies, regrets, desperate promises that meant nothing now. I left them all unanswered, refusing to let her drag me back into the web of lies she'd spun. Whatever she was feeling, she would have to deal with it alone. I had found a strange strength in the silence, in knowing that I was moving forward while she was still struggling with the weight of her choices. Friends and family reached out too. They'd seen it all that night, and I heard the shock in their voices when they called to check in on me. They hadn't known the full extent of it, hadn't realized how deeply she betrayed me until that night. The support was overwhelming, though I found I preferred my solitude. The space to process everything, the quiet to decide what I wanted next. Weeks passed, and the seasons began to change. The days grew longer, and the city streets started to feel like home again. I had made peace with what happened, and the raw anger had faded into a quiet, firm resolve to build a life that no longer depended on anyone else. Little by little, I started filling my time with new routines, exploring interests I'd set aside, and reconnecting with old friends who reminded me of who I was before her. Then, one evening, a familiar number lit up my phone. I stared at it for a moment, half expecting her to appear outside my apartment, one last attempt to undo the finality of our parting. But it wasn't her. It was her sister, Sarah, a woman who had always been quieter, always kept to herself. I hesitated, but something made me answer. "Hey, Jason," she said, her voice soft, hesitant. "I know this is a little strange, but I just wanted to see how you were holding up." There was a genuine kindness in her voice, something real that I hadn't realized I'd missed. We talked for a while, mostly about the mundane things, work, life, the changes that had happened since that night. She was cautious, never probing too far, just listening in that calm way that was so unlike her sister. And for the first time since everything had happened, I felt a bit of warmth slip through the cracks. A reminder that there were people who could be trusted, people who cared without ulterior motives or lies hidden behind their smiles. Over the months that followed, Sarah and I kept in touch, our conversations a quiet refuge from everything I'd been through. It wasn't anything more than friendship, but it was something I hadn't realized I needed, a way to reconnect with a world I'd nearly shut myself off from. And as time passed, I found myself moving forward, not just surviving, but living again. I was no longer the man weighed down by betrayal or bitterness, but someone who had rebuilt himself from the ruins. Someone ready to face whatever came next, knowing that, no matter what, he had his own back. Looking back now, I realized the journey had been a painful one, but also one of the most powerful experiences of my life. It had taught me the importance of trust, of loyalty, and most of all, of self-respect. And that was something she could never take away. Months after that night, life had settled into something I could only describe as peaceful. The ache was gone, replaced by a calm that felt like both closure and a new beginning. I wasn't looking for anything or anyone when I ran into Sarah again, this time in person. It was a chance encounter at a small coffee shop I'd started going on weekends, my own little corner of the city. She saw me first, calling my name with a warm smile, and for a moment, it felt like time stopped. The last time we'd been together in person had been before everything fell apart, back when I'd been part of her family. But this was different, softer somehow, as though the weight of the past had finally lifted, leaving something lighter between us. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, and I nodded, grateful for the company. We fell into easy conversation, the awkwardness fading as we talked about the most ordinary things. She told me about her latest work project, a trip she'd been planning, the new book she was reading. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was reconnecting, not only with her, but with myself. Here, with her, there was no expectation, no baggage from a broken relationship, only a clean slate. Over the next few weeks, we started meeting regularly, each visit a little step forward. There was no pretense between us, no effort to impress or convince each other of anything. She was simply Sarah, and I was simply me, two people who had found a connection in the wake of a storm. One evening, as we walked along the river, she turned to me, her expression thoughtful. "I was always so sad for you, you know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Watching you go through all of that, I never knew how to help. I looked at her, the words catching in my throat. You did, though, I replied. Just being there, that was more than enough. We walked in silence for a while, each of us taking in the quiet of the city around us. And in that moment, I felt something shift, a gentle understanding, an unspoken promise that maybe, just maybe, something beautiful could come out of the wreckage of my past. As the days passed, I realized that I no longer carried the scars of betrayal as a weight, but as a reminder that I had overcome, that I had rebuilt myself. And perhaps a reminder that, despite the hurt, life had a way of surprising you, of bringing people into your life who could make the world feel whole again. Maybe this new chapter was just beginning, and maybe, with Sarah by my side, I'd finally be ready to start it. As weeks turned into months, Sarah and I found ourselves drawn closer, almost effortlessly. Our connection was built on a quiet understanding and a shared history, one that didn't need explaining or reliving but somehow gave us both a foundation of trust. We never rushed anything. Each shared moment, each lingering glance, each late-night conversation happened naturally. It was refreshing to feel something real building between us, piece by piece, as though we were crafting a new story together, one where we each knew the other's heart. One evening, as we sat on a bench overlooking the city lights, she leaned her head against my shoulder, her voice soft in the stillness. I was worried you'd think I was just a reminder of everything, she murmured. I turned to her, catching her gaze. Sarah, being with you, it's like a second chance, a fresh start. You're not a reminder of anything but what's possible. She smiled, her hand finding mine, our fingers intertwining. In that moment, I realized that moving forward wasn't about forgetting the past, but about understanding how it had shaped me and letting it guide me to something better. Sarah didn't fill the empty spaces left behind by my previous life. She made me see that those spaces were room to grow, to trust, and to love again. The city lights twinkled, and I knew that this moment, with Sarah by my side, was one I'd treasure forever. The pain and betrayal that had once defined me were now memories, lessons woven into the fabric of my life, but no longer heavy on my shoulders. Here, with her, I felt lighter, hopeful, and ready for the future. As we sat in the quiet, the night settling around us, I knew we were building something unbreakable, crafted from honesty, respect, and a mutual understanding that made each day feel like a new beginning.